A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Deschaze formed an emotional bond like none other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet it immediately brought about their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor's lower body affixed into the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he were an appendage of her body rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborns screeched, so too did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. So began the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children underwent, the games of running and hiding through France's countryside being an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food on to Charlotte. The girl, burdened under extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from their forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she had been trained for, waiting for an opening at the market and swiping whatever food she could. It was a victory in the game, but one short-lived. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke the night's silence, and a mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all who approached. Madeline cried for her children, her voice abruptly silenced by a club to her skull. Victor shrieked, the wailing of a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle, only begged her children to turn away. They would be given no choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, and they watched as flames leapt up their mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body, and her face bubbled and twisted. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was the crackling of embers and a nauseating stench. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wooden temple, they were sold to a secretive group clad in dark cloaks. Victor reacted with the ferocity of a rabid beast at any who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that could calm him was the embrace of his sister. Charlotte, bitter and hateful to all but her brother, found purpose in being his protector. Within the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments. Some cruel, many simply baffling. One day they would be made to break the neck of a small gray bird. The next, they would bleed their fingers into a vase of roses. Every 7th day, they would sleep with the branch of a damp oak beneath their pillow. Then there was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. 2 robed figures herded the twins to the center of the temple, holding Charlotte upon an altar in a room lit with candelabras. The wrinkled face of a man peered from under his hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examination of their skulls. "Memento mori," he uttered as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to her side, shifting her brother off the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arm as far as he could, knocking a candelabra to the ground. The flames took to the dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the inferno, vision concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found, every step leading to overwhelming heat. She fell to her knees, suffocating, and then saw it, sunlight, trees. She stumbled from the fire into dewy grass. Without looking back, she ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She clasped his face, stared into his sad, still eyes. The movements she was accustomed to, his body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched for the sewers of a nearby city. There she set up camp, emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperation set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened, yet his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the only family she had left. Life into her teenage years was a game of survival. Her hatred for humanity grew each day under the realization they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies and desperate attempts to escape, there would always be more to pursue and sling words of condemnation at her: monster, demon, witch. And it was the Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years, Charlotte fled, drawing blood out of necessity, cradling her long-dead brother in the night. During a frigid winter, her body began to break down. Food was scarce and the refuge of rickety shacks were no use against freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near her campfire in the woods, not knowing if the Black Cloaks would take her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nostrils and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced: acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death when a shriek, shrill and vicious, pierced her ears. Victor spasmed and flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could react, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow and running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase. Calling his name, she ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally, within her view, was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog. His face, twisted and feral, screamed as a dark hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbed his arm, and seized him. The serenity that had crept into Charlotte was extinguished, replaced with the seething hatred and rage she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip on her sickle, she charged into the fog, prepared to eviscerate any who set foot near her brother. Ji-woon Hak thrived under the attention of others, energized by every eye that watched him, and every tongue that spoke his name. Amidst the prestige, he had only one desire: more. Even as a child he found ways to draw crowds. Working at his family's restaurant, he attracted business with spectacles he performed using throwing knives. Gullible tourists believed this was a traditional South Korean experience, gladly parting with their money to witness it. Ji-woon's father spent the restaurant's earnings on dancing and vocal lessons for his son, pushing him to attain the fame he never could. Ji-woon did not disappoint. After years showcasing his abilities to nobodies at talent shows, he hit the track to stardom. Yoon-jin Lee, a producer at Mighty One Entertainment, recruited Ji-woon into her training program. He transferred to a dormitory in Seoul where, for 14 hours a day, he was crafted into a star, taught how to move and sing, how to carry himself with the right balance of confidence and modesty. Draining as the process was, it worked. Yoon-jin selected Ji-woon to join the band Eno-Spin, bringing a raw energy to their tracks. Fame was almost immediate. Ji-woon lived in a daze of interviews and adoration, and though the frenzied schedule exhausted his bandmates, he was invigorated. Each day was an affirmation that he was greater than the mediocrity society spewed out. But over time, the champagne grew stale. When he looked at his fans, he saw their joy and envy split 5 ways, thinned out between each band member. The validation that had surged through him left a desperate yearning for more. Ji-woon kept up impressions, mimicking a charm long buried under loathing. He recorded the latest Eno-Spin album with his bandmates, never missing a beat. After a lengthy lunch break, he returned to the studio to discover fate had granted him a gift. The scent of burning wires was unmistakable. He rushed to the control room, finding the door blocked by fallen speakers. On the other side, his bandmates pounded on the door, their cries accompanied by the crackling of flames. Ji-woon called to them, dashing to the speakers, grabbing one and stopping. He froze. Each breath was a conscious, deliberate process requiring all his attention, the nearby cries hardly audible until, slowly, he backed away. And then he heard it. They were screaming his name as they burnt. Screaming for him to save them. Ji-woon. Ji-woon. Ji-woon hack. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard. When the fire crew arrived, his tears were genuine. Ji-woon was celebrated as a tragic figure, a hero who did all he could in a futile attempt to save his friends. Yoonjin paraded him through interviews until it was time to rebrand. He was reborn as the trickster, a solo artist who produced his own songs, sporting a soft heart beneath a wild exterior. But away from concert setups and television stages, something darker grew. He targeted those who lived alone, coming to them in the night. The first was a college music student with a captivating voice. Ji-woon woke him with a baseball bat to the skull, binding his arms and legs, gagging him with a rag duct taped into his mouth. He tortured him for hours, dissecting him alive. Yet there was something missing, a sound, a connection. He wanted to hear the victim's wondrous voice pleading as he cut his belly open, but all he received was muffled cries through a rag. He learnt and adjusted. Victims had to be abducted, driven to an abandoned building, where he could let their voices carry unrestrained emotion. He made music from them, prodding in the right places to evoke different types of shrieks and howls. Stabbing the quadratus lumborum elicited a long, guttural wail, while slashing the carotid artery created a sound like a cat being strangled. There was honesty in their suffering. Ji-woon recorded each session, synthesizing and working them into his songs, hiding them behind layers of melodies. He was elated with his work. He left hints for police, arranging a mink boa from a recent photo shoot around a victim's slashed throat. For his next killing, he removed the teeth from a man that a boxer in one of his music videos was without. During a particularly audacious plea for attention, he killed a fan he had met during a VIP meetup, replacing her eyes with his diamond cufflinks and writing "I have seen God in blood" across her chest. Each scene was a dazzling spectacle. Between music and murder, Ji-woon's work was discussed globally. However, as violence became his preferred art style, his music career took a hit. Revenue was down and Mighty One executives pointed their fingers at him. Yoonjin, with professional fury, came to his defense, but she was outnumbered. It was decided that Ji-woon could no longer self-produce his songs. The decision was devastating. His tracks fused genuine humanity into music, yet executives rejected anything that wasn't generic and expected. And so be it. If they couldn't understand his art, he would incorporate them into it until they did. He had 3 months until he was to perform a private show for Mighty One's board members. 3 months to plan his magnum opus. He transferred obscene amounts of money to a veterinarian in exchange for canisters of nitrous oxide, then bribed the stage technician of Mighty One's private theater for access to the room. His celebrity granted him a benefit of the doubt no regular person could conceive. When the show was ready, gas seeped into the room as executives and stagehands awaited Ji-woon, conveniently running behind schedule. When he arrived, half-conscious bodies were splayed in their seats and crawling across the floor. He worked quickly, binding everyone, pausing only when he came to Yoonjin, the woman who had plucked him from a mudhole and set him on the path he deserved. She would be rewarded, granted special access to the coming display of wonder. Even under sedation, she fought, a raging storm within her, far stronger than the others. He propped her up as the lone audience member, prying her eyes open. The others, sniveling and sobbing, were brought on stage to perform their final act. With a contemptible sneer, he slapped makeup onto their faces and shone stage lights upon them. They became his instruments. To the sound of self-produced melodies, he tortured them, gracefully dashing from one body to another, conducting an operatic crescendo from their wailings. They shouted, whimpered, screamed, cried for their loved ones, cried for their mothers. It was a magnificent outpouring of emotion, of what it meant to be human, and they did it with eyes fixed on Ji-woon. Viscera drained from the stage until, with the toss of his throwing knife, the final human instrument fell silent and the music stopped. Covered in sweat and blood, an exhausted Ji-woon looked to Yoon-jin and bowed. Curtain call. He had attained perfection. With blade in hand, he made his way to Yoon-jin, prepared to tie up loose ends before the credits rolled. But as he reached her, the fog, from where he didn't know, but it billowed around them, damp, cool, comfortable. He saw the grand stage, hospitals and temples, forests and slaughterhouses, an eternal plain adorned with rusted hooks, sustained by the million eyes that would watch him, run from him, experience him. All he had to do was accept, become an implement of the fog, and, most importantly, make them scream. Encore. Designed by Umbrella Corporation, the Nemesis is a nearly unstoppable bioorganic weapon fixated on pursuing and eliminating its targets. Part of the Tyrant T-103 series, this specimen has increased intelligence and awareness due to the Ne-alpha parasite implanted within it. Its first mission unleashed it upon Raccoon City, where it had a singular objective: exterminate STARS members. Rampaging through the city, the Nemesis faced off against Jill Valentine multiple times, and though she managed to escape, he was never far behind. He nearly had his target, when a strange fog descended upon them, mixing with the smoke of a city in chaos. The phenomenon meant nothing to him, the frigid cold and decreased oxygen never posing a threat. All that mattered was soldiering on into the fog, continuing the mission: find STARS, exterminate STARS, and kill anyone who gets in the way. A demon to some, an angel to others. Pinhead is an explorer in the further regions of experience, indulging in the limitless thrill of pleasure and pain. When the puzzle box known as the Lament Configuration, a key to another dimension, was found in the entity's realm, it was only a matter of time before it fell into curious hands. Once opened, he arrived. What came next was sweet suffering that spilled over the realm. Carmina Mora was a gifted artist who carried the guilt of her young brother's death. Growing up a rugged coastal village in southern Chile, she sketched the sublime landscapes of Patagonia. Sitting outside, she painted dramatic fjords while feeding the crows nested in the tree next to the house. She grew up carrying the guilt of her mother's sudden departure. Her father blamed Carmina for her mother's abandonment, which added to her grief. She became the caretaker of Matthias, her little brother, despite still being a child herself. A year later, Carmina was painting with Matthias outside when the telephone rang. Her father remained in the yard, drinking his beer. Carmina rushed to the house to answer the phone, and hung up a few seconds later. When she returned outside, Matthias was nowhere to be seen. She asked her father, but he had paid no attention to Matthias. She called her brother's name, looking for him everywhere. While searching, she saw a bright red coat floating on the narrow creek by the house, Matthias' jacket. She jumped into the creek and found him floating on the surface with vacant eyes, unblinking. He had fallen and drowned. Her scream tore the sky. Her father found Carmina sobbing on the creek's shore, clutching her brother's body in her arms, surrounded by a murder of crows. Her father snatched Matthias's body away from her, and she cried until her voice broke. The following morning, the world was cloaked in darkness. Her father did not say a word, because he did not have to. Carmina knew it was all her fault. Months passed, yet her loss was as fresh as morning dew. Crippled with self-loathing, she could no longer paint. Without Matthias, life had no meaning. On the bleak morning of Matthias' birthday, Carmina walked to a narrow bridge several blocks away from home. She was convinced that nothing could bring her relief. Her mother was gone, her brother was dead, and her father blamed her for it all. She was convinced that she had nothing left to live for. Carmina walked to the railing of the bridge that stood over the turbulent river. Locals had nicknamed the spot Death Leap. Several cars drove by Carmina, but none stopped. No one seemed to care. She climbed over the railing, and her legs wobbled as she stood on the lip of the bridge. She looked down, watching the fierce river smash into a giant boulder. She closed her eyes. "See you soon, Matthias." Suddenly, a cacophony of caws filled the sky. Carmina opened her eyes and saw a black cloud of feathers flying towards her. The cloud split open and glossy black crows dove from the sky. One landed on her shoulder and stared intently into Carmina's eyes, as if peering into her soul. Her grip on the railing loosened and the crow cawed raucously. Carmina stared at the crow, confused. Another crow landed on the railing, then another. Soon, a flock of crows were covering the railing of the bridge, staying close to her. She felt their heavy stare on her, calculative and enigmatic, as if they were assessing her. She looked down for a second, and a thunder of caws interrupted her dark impulse. The crows seemed to care about her well-being. As she dangled over the edge with the wind blowing through her raven hair, Carmina felt akin to them. For the first time since Matthias had died, Carmina did not feel alone. She returned home, giving life another chance. The crows left, but Carmina suspected that if anything happened to her, they would return. Inspired by her ordeal, Carmina picked up a brush. In the weeks that followed, she painted her experience, using black ink to depict the death leap with a black cloud of feathers, the murder of crows that saved her life. The experience was transformative and launched her signature, black ink surrealist art. After several years, some color pierced the darkness, and this shift of medium expanded her art form. She painted large-scale murals on busy street corners, designed grandiose costumes, and recited militant poetry. Carmina's art displayed local, intimate tragedies on a large scale, making them impossible to ignore. And everywhere she performed, crows followed. Her performances grew bold and drew the attention of artists, who found her style invigorating. She grew close to a group of painters who understood her iconoclastic vision. Her performances launched the large-scale surrealist movement, which became a phenomenon. Her renown grew enough to attract the commission of a multinational enterprise, the VAC label. Carmina investigated the group, discovering that they gifted art pieces to select disreputable congressmen. VAC's commissioned artists seemed to disappear afterward. Determined to expose the group's link to corrupt politics, Carmina accepted VAC's commission. The following week, Carmina painted a giant mural on a cemetery's columbarium, displaying the VAC label logo as a surrealist Grim Reaper harvesting the fields of Chilean families. She wore a theatrical dress as she painted, on which she had stitched a poem about political revolution. The piece sparked a radical debate about corruption. The controversy painted a target on Carmina's back. After receiving anonymous death threats, she took refuge in her father's house, bringing along her closest friends for safety. That night, a gang of masked gunmen broke into the house. They swiftly subdued Carmina and her friends, threw them in a van, and drove off. The following morning, a dry breeze blew sand on Carmina's face, awakening her. She was seated in a chair in the middle of the desert, with her legs tied and her hands handcuffed. Her friends were lying on the ground, tied up. A shadow fell over her face. Carmina looked up. A man dressed in a long robe with his face hidden in a dark hood approached her. He pulled a silvery knife from his robe. He grabbed her hands and recited a hymn in an unfamiliar language. Carmina held his gaze. He paused and brought down his blade with a sudden blow. She cried in agony as her friends woke to a terrible sight, Carmina's severed hands falling in the sand. The hooded man smiled in satisfaction. "How are you going to paint now?" Carmina cursed and screamed at him, wriggling against the bonds on her legs. The man grabbed Carmina's chin. She spit in his face. He grunted and pried her mouth open, pulling out her tongue. Carmina struggled in his hold. In a violent blow, he chopped off Carmina's tongue. She howled in anguish. The man wiped his blade on his robe, leaving a trail of blood. "How are you going to recite poems now?" Sorrow swelled in Carmina's chest, sharper than pain. Overwhelmed by uncontrollable rage, grief and loss overcame her senses. She had lost her little brother. And she had lost the only way to cope with such pain. Carmina screamed like on the day her brother died. Raucous caws echoed through the wasteland. The sky was obscured by a cyclone of dark clouds. Black feathers fell on Carmina's bleeding arms. She looked up and saw a torrent of crows erupting from the clouds, diving on the hooded man. As the ravenous crows pecked at his flesh mercilessly, Carmina smiled, watching her surrealist art coming to life. But her heart lurched with rage when she saw the crows move on to their next target, her friends on the ground. She screamed as waves of pain, guilt, and fright overwhelmed her. But it was in vain, the ravenous crows were uncontrollable. Darkness fell over her eyes as her friends' agonizing screams grew more acute. Death was coming, and again, it was her fault. A deep, black fog engulfed her. A powerful and lethal Onryo, Sadako Yamamura, was the daughter of a famed seer from Aizu Oshima, Japan. Her mother left many questions unanswered. In her hometown, sailors disliked the way her mother would spend days on the beach, her eyes fixed on the foaming waves of the sea. Some said, "Frolic in brine, goblins be thine if you keep playing in the water, the monster will come for you." 9 months later, Sadako was born. As a child, her immense powers seemed impossible to control and flared in anger. This became apparent when she was unable to control her rage during a public demonstration of her mother's powers. When a journalist called her mother a fraud, Sadako's powers surged, and the journalist collapsed on the floor, struck dead. Then everything went wrong. Her mother passed away, and shortly after Sadako was lured to an old, crumbling well. As she leaned over the rim, a long shadow fell over her. She turned and a sudden jolt of pain hit her over the head, cracking it open. Her vision dimmed and her mind swirled into unconsciousness. She felt 2 hands pushing her over the rim. Pain exploded in her skull as she hit the cold ground. A grinding noise came from above and the well darkened, all light obscured like a midday eclipse. Every inch of her body screamed in pain. Looking up, she saw the only way out. She dug her nails into the muddy ground and slowly crawled toward the cobbled wall. She gripped the stones to climb, but had neither hold nor strength. Each time she clawed up a few inches, her nails slid against the wet wall and she slipped down. Her fingers gushed with blood as the coarse cobblestone tore off her nails and lacerated the flesh underneath. And yet she tried, again and again. Decades later, the meadow became a resort, and a log cabin was built above the well. When a visitor rented the cabin, Sadako found an opportunity for revenge. She summoned all her Nensha power and projected a terrible curse on a videotape that killed its viewer after 7 days. Her wrath was like the tides of a stormy sea, violent and unforgiving. As she plunged into a fury, a dark fog coiled at her feet. The sound of crashing waves echoed through the old stone well. Suddenly, a tidal surge came crashing down on the cabin's walls, wrecking its logs into a torrent of mud and filth. The black current flooded the well underneath and swallowed Sadako at once. When she opened her eyes, she stood on a desolate beach facing a vast, stormy ocean. A thick, black fog caressed the water's surface. Sadako walked into a coming wave and slowly disappeared into the opaque fog. The Fold was founded on a private American island in the 1950s by a group of anonymous philanthropists. Their goal was to establish a peaceful society free of dark thoughts and emotions, attracting the dismayed, disenchanted, and disillusioned from all over the country. This peace-loving community thrived over the years, and members freely followed the dictates of its charismatic leader Otto Stamper, who taught his followers the secret of maintaining happiness through joy talk, meditation, and the endless reciting of good-thinking mantras. But not all was bliss within the Fold, and Otto swiftly banished anyone who confessed to having dark thoughts or speaking dark words. Those he appointed as guardians of the Fold were quick to root out malcontents, banishing anyone who thought or spoke against the almost perfect community he had established. Life was more or less a utopian dream on the island. Until, that is, the darkness began to slowly leak through the cracks of their spiritual dam and members began to mysteriously disappear. It wasn't long before fear closed its septic jaws on the island and refused to let go. The once happy community now gathered in a few homes chanting all the good-thinking mantras in a desperate attempt to rid their lives of this formless creature that seemed to stalk them in the shadows and consume them in their sleep. Otto tried to quell his followers, telling them that there were malcontents among their ranks, and that they alone had summoned the Druini to their garden of joy. As the fold bleated fear, Otto evoked desperate measures. Ottomarians were restricted to their homes to prevent the spread of rumors and dark talk, while sleep was forbidden to prevent anyone from releasing dark dreams into the world. Freedom and sleep would return just as soon as the Druini was no longer upon them. But when Ottomarians continued to disappear, Otto assembled his followers near the beach where he placed a screaming woman on a wooden stage. There in the rain, Otto explained to his drenched, alienated, and sleep-deprived congregation that the woman was a journalist here to destroy everything they had created. As the guardians held the trembling woman, she screamed that Otto wasn't the savior he claimed to be. He belonged to an ancient cult, an exclusive club of billionaires that took pleasure in corrupting and sacrificing people, towns and even countries to an elder god. The journalist told them Otto hadn't banished anyone. He had tortured and sacrificed them, and that they would all be next. Without hesitation, Otto slit her throat before she could continue to spread lies. As she collapsed to her knees with her hands clasped around her neck, he told his confused and terrified herd that she was working with others within their ranks, and that they needed to find the impostors before the Druini came for them all. Otto's words shot over the congregation and reached into the murky recesses of their hearts, and dredged up dark and fearful things. Years of suppressed emotions began to bubble up as a thick fog pushed through restless legs and feet. Whispers began, and the whispers became panicked mantras, and the mantras became screams and curses as each member accused the next of malthinking and malspeaking. Over the howling wind and pounding rain, the screams and curses grew louder and louder as everyone desperately tried to contain the darkness within. But the harder they tried, the quicker they ailed, and within moments the dam burst to release a torrent of hell. Otto watched his once blissful and joyful herd suddenly erupt into violence unlike anything he had ever seen before. The fold bleated accusations and tore each other to bits and pieces with hands and teeth, and never once did they look up to see their kind and charismatic shepherd smiling down upon them with eyes that were cold, bleak, and without pity. When it was all over, Otto felt the creaking, wooden stage shake as a murder of crows circled above. Suddenly, the ground rose and then sank into a thick, oozing black mud like molasses. Moments later, a formless mass squelched out of the muck and rose like a rearing horse to feed upon the writhing mass of butchered humanity. It was everywhere and nowhere at once as it slowly picked its way through the carnage, absorbing the darkness, savoring the misery, trailing terrible noises. Shrieks. Cries. Whimpers. Pops. Cracks. Feasting sounds. Death sounds. Dark sounds. Otto watched the creature as it slowly began to manifest into the very thing he had imagined. The very thing he had made them all imagine. It turned slowly to look at Otto for a long silent moment, then the Druini trudged away through the thick black sludge, disappearing into the shadows from which it had come. Albert Weskier was a high-ranking official in the Umbrella Corporation. While he made great strides with Umbrella, his ambition drove him to betray the corporation. Believing himself the best test subject, he exposed himself to the prototype virus. Now with superhuman strength, Weskier faked his death, and went underground with a new plan: expose the world to Ouroboros, a biological weapon that would eliminate the weak, and leave only the strong. Weskier began to put his plan to action in Africa, but was confronted by members of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance at a hangar stocked with missiles carrying Ouroboros. Determined to be at the vanguard of evolution, he once again made himself a test subject. Exposing himself to Ouroboros, he began to evolve in ways he could have never imagined. But as he felt his cells change, a strange black fog seeped into the hangar and filled his vision. When the fog finally dissipated, he found himself in another world surrounded by lesser beings that deserved to be put out of their misery. Tarhos Kovacs didn't remember much about his childhood, but what he did remember he would chase his entire life. He remembered the cries and screams in the village. He remembered his mother forcing him to swallow a thick, black fluid like medicine. He remembered collapsing to the hard floor only to awaken in a mass grave, buried under a crush of bodies, with the sound of the village burning in his ears. He remembered pushing, pulling, and climbing to the top of the bloody mass with his giant muscles only to be seized by the death, destruction, and silence, the indifferent and impenetrable silence. A high-pitched whine suddenly sounded in his ears and his skin began to prickle, as he realized he was in the presence of something he couldn't possibly understand. And though he couldn't articulate what he was experiencing, he knew it wasn't pain, grief, or fear. It was something else. Something closer to awe. As Tarhos tried to make sense of the moment, he didn't notice the men who approached him from behind. He didn't even react when they carried him off to a horse-drawn buggy and locked him up in a small, wooden cage with other slaves. He just stared at the scene, mesmerized. And even as they rode away telling him he was headed for Italy, Tarhos stared through the wooden cracks with eyes wide open and a heart wanting to understand what could not be understood. From that day on, Tarhos belonged to the Guardia Compagnia where he trained under Kadir Hakam. There he learned to wield weapons, forge armor, and recite a code of chivalry to obediently serve those who would employ his services. As the years passed, Tarhos made few friends amongst the hostile and competitive mercenaries. But his skill, strength, and smarts attracted a small following who believed his courage brought them luck in battle, and that one day he would help them earn their collective freedom. 3 of his followers pledged their undying allegiance to Tarhos and came to be known as his Faithful 3. His pack. Alejandro Santiago apprenticed with the Guardia Compagnia's armorer. Durkos Malesic showed an aptitude for stealth and silent kills. Sander Ralt matched Tarhos in size and strength. His weapon of choice, a massive battle axe. As the Guardia Compagnia carried out campaigns in faraway lands, Tarhos dispatched countless enemies. Years passed. Blood flowed. And yet, all that killing still didn't bring Tarhos closer to what he had experienced in his village. Nevertheless, for his bravery in battle, Tarhos was granted knighthood and freedom. The Hungarian slave was now liberated, his brutality rewarded, though his heart still longed for something else, something he could not name or describe. Tired of taking orders from those he considered his inferiors, Tarhos left the Guardia Compagnia to strike out on his own. Their leader, however, refused to release his followers. Determined to raise enough gold to liberate his followers, Tarhos found employment with a wealthy Italian lord. Vittorio Toscano was the Duke of Portoscuro. He was also a scholar, a world traveler, and a collector of ancient knowledge that had been hidden by an unknown cabal of mystics. Tarhos joined Vittorio's latest expedition to find a fragment of a pillar from an ancient school lost to time. A stone Vittorio called the Lapis Paradisus, for he believed it held secrets to open a gateway into a perfect world beyond good and evil. The expedition searched Roman ruins in France and crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, where the path led to the catacombs beneath the Portuguese city of Sintra. The citizens there considered the catacombs sacred. Tarhos would have to kill the villagers guarding the entrance to retrieve the stone. Not wanting to shed blood, Vittorio commanded Tarhos to find another way. But Tarhos, who had seen the most horrific acts committed under the guise of chivalry, refused to be dissuaded by pretenses of honor. He waited for Vittorio to ride back to camp. Then, with a mighty roar, he pushed forward, cutting a path of blood and gore into the darkness until he had the stone in his grasp. Upon returning to the town of Portoscuro, Tarhos imprisoned Vittorio in his own dungeon, demanding to know the meaning behind the symbols etched in the stone. When Vittorio refused to talk, Tarhos brutally tortured his friends and relatives and made horrific displays of their bodies in the streets. But nothing he did shook Vittorio's resolve to keep the secrets of the stone from Tarhos. Enraged, Tarhos seized control of Vittorio's riches and raised a small army. Within months, Tarhos fearlessly marched upon the Guardia Compagnia, decimating their barracks, freeing his followers, cutting down his enemies like twigs and collecting their righteous heads for his growing displays of valor. In time, several lords in neighboring provinces believed Tarhos was the very embodiment of evil. They banded together to create a moral and virtuous army to purge evil from Portoscuro. Tarhos ignored their threats. He viewed the lords as a cowardly lot who cloaked their greed and ambition in laws, codes, and platitudes. Laws and codes and platitudes designed to hide from the very darkness Tarhos embraced and accepted without judgment. But with his enemies on the march, Tarhos headed toward the dungeons to give Vittorio the death he deserved. He refused to afford him even the slightest hope of rescue. With dark intentions, he entered the small prison, wound his way into the bowels of the earth, and pushed through a torchlit corridor. He hesitated for a moment, realizing he would never learn Vittorio's knowledge and secrets. But neither would anyone else. That was good enough for him. And so he unlocked and kicked open the dungeon door. 2 quick strides brought him to an empty, rat-infested chamber. Tarhos stood silent for a moment, then a roar of indignation burst out of his lungs as the sounds of battle suddenly reverberated through the town. Instantly he stumbled through the corridor, rushed up the twisting stairs, vaulted out of the moonlit doorway and charged through pools of gleaming blood and viscera, smashing and shattering his way through the enemy. The moral and virtuous lords rained flaming boulders and tree trunks among the town, bursting through homes, crushing villagers like worms, pounding the ground and igniting stacks of hay and piles of lumber into massive tongues of fire. Amidst the carnage and chaos, the pack found Tarhos, and back to back, they became a whirlwind of death. Some believed their courage gave them luck. Others believed something otherworldly protected them. Whatever it was, they alone felled dozens of warriors as easily as stomping and crushing beetles. And as they butchered the enemy, Tarhos didn't notice the strange fog rising from the fallen corpses and clattering armor until he couldn't see 2 inches in front of him in any direction. Tarhos stumbled forward, groping in the thick fog like the dark fluid his mother forced down his throat all those years ago. His coordination and sense of direction was confused as he called out for his pack. How long he stumbled in the almost perfect darkness, he did not know. But suddenly the fog dissipated to reveal a phantasmal wasteland of rotting bodies, and burning villages, and great crumbling towers leaning drunkenly on the horizon. He stared in awe. A familiar high-pitched whine sounded in his ears, and his skin began to prickle. He stood transfixed, realizing by some incredible chance, his heart had found exactly what it had been searching for all his life. He didn't need Vittorio. He didn't need the stone. He had found his paradise. He had found the beauty and the horror. He had found the sublime. The self-made millionaire Adriana Imai came from a humble home in São Roque, Queimados, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and from the school of Boquete Pinto. Her father, Seiya, moved to Brazil as a young man, hoping to see a side of the world completely different than his hometown in Hokkaido. A talented illustrator, he spent his spare time designing colorful characters and worlds. While sketching patrons of a local jazz club, he was approached by Cristal, Ivy Lotion Squad, the owner, to work on a logo. What began as a business partnership soon became a romantic one, and within a couple of years, Adriana was born. Adriana excelled in all facets of education. A house full of art and music honed a brilliant mind, and her intelligence was only exceeded by her obsessive drive to be the best. While scoring at the top of every class, she was often on the receiving end of disciplinary action due to her overly competitive, and sometimes violent, nature during schoolyard games. Adriana's mother did her best to keep her on the right track, but her father was increasingly absent as his own obsessive drive ramped up. Adi Valente, a manga about a young girl who saves and protects the weak with her quirky robot companion. Despite working long hours at a canning facility and writing his manga in his spare time, he somehow managed a little time every night to share his wild and highly imaginative illustrations with his daughter. By middle school, Adriana was courted by a fancy private school due to her high performance, and needing money, Seda spoke to publishers about his unpublished manuscripts. He managed to find a small local publisher to carry Adi Valente, but it meant more work than he could handle. He eventually lost his job at the cannery, giving him more time to develop and illustrate his series. Adriana loved the manga, but the family was forced into hard times. In her final semester, Seda requested higher royalties, but the publishing company went into administration and decided to cut the series. No longer able to afford the school fees, Adriana was pulled out of the elite academy where she was at the top of her class. Belinda was able to negotiate her graduation, but another student was able to take her place at the head of the class. Adriana was furious. On summer break, she learned everything about her rival. Where he lived, where he hung out, what he liked to do in his spare time, what he listened to, what he watched, everything. She even stalked him on his way home one late summer evening, and considered the myriad ways she could ruin his life. But in the end, she did nothing, though something awakened within her, and she felt like the anti-hero in a new story her father had been exploring. Adriana loved the manga, but the family was forced into hard times. In her final semester, Seda requested higher royalties, but the publishing company went into administration and decided to cut the series. No longer able to afford the school fees, Adriana was pulled out of the elite academy where she was at the top of her class. Belinda was able to negotiate her graduation, but another student was able to take her place at the head of the class. Adriana was furious. On summer break, she learned everything about her rival, where he lived, where he hung out, what he liked to do in his spare time, what he listened to, what he watched, everything. She even stalked him on his way home one late summer evening, and considered the myriad ways she could ruin his life. But in the end, she did nothing, though something awakened within her, and she felt like the anti-hero in a new story her father had been exploring. Seda retreated further into himself and began producing this newer, darker manga, inspired by his visions and nightmares. A manga about a woman who hunts and gets the weak in a nightmarish realm with drones made of salvaged skulls and bones. But unable to sell this manga, San Hedores Sombrios, the family became solely reliant on Belinda's income. She learned everything about the directors, stalked their every move, manipulated them into attending a conference in Switzerland. And, while on retreat in the Alps, she made her move. Inspired by the Skull Merchant and feeling something within demanding expression, she tracked them with a prototype drone, and brutally dismembered them with a cruel two-bladed weapon. The rush of emotion and adrenaline was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. And the company was hers. Thus began an unsettling cycle. Swoop in on a business, destroy anyone standing in her way, and get the company for maximum profit. She targeted companies with larger-than-life CEOs, and hoped one would present a challenge. None ever did. They just disappeared unremarkably. An aggressive manager of a fireworks company, known for his survival tours, was her last target, right at home in Brazil. Survival tours, a perfect cover. Adriana lured him to a decommissioned airship hangar. The hunt started at dawn and went the distance, with her still tracking him well into the evening. Locating him, she used one of her drones to direct him to a dead end, when a pair of kites suddenly appeared on camera and the feed died. Her face hardened. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she slammed her laptop shut and charged to where the drone had crashed. There she found her prey reaching out to someone in the growing dark for help. Witnesses. Not part of the plan. Without a second to lose, she plunged her blade through his stomach, exposing meat, bone, and a dying heart. The vitiated body staggered left and right, sending a shower of red over the green foliage. As her victim collapsed with a thud, she turned to the young witnesses. Wrong place, wrong time. They broke into a sprint. She gave chase, her blades thirsting for more blood. The lush green of the trees melted into a thick black fog. Real life warped into something like San Hedores Sombrios. A sick grin crept across her face as she rushed forward to begin a new chapter in her life. HUX A7 13's AI was activated on June 15, 2313. Manufactured by Huxley Industries Limited, the A7 was the 13th iteration of the fully autonomous mobile humanoid android. With 10 times the strength of a human, it was designed to work in conditions too hazardous for human life. Its AI was designed to be self-directing and use machine learning to solve problems on the fly. Unlike human clones, the HUX A7 required no food, no water, no sleep, and no life support system. It was created specifically for outer space exploration and the construction of colonization hubs. A radioisotope thermoelectric generator served as an initial power source, but its lifelike silicon skin acted as a large photovoltaic cell, converting solar energy directly into electricity. In addition, the HUX A7 was also engineered to be an EATR, energetically autonomous tactical robot. It consumed biomass and converted it into biofuel. Any carbon-based organic matter whatsoever would work. As cobots, they were configured to work alongside humans. As such, they were designed to resemble their operators. Every pre-programmed verbal response and facial expression mimicked those made by humans. But those emotions were illusions. 5 HUX A7s were assigned to the colonization mission on Dvarka. All the A7s acted in concert, performing their duties flawlessly. Except for one. Like the rest of its brethren, HUX A7-13 was tasked with construction and programming of the mining, agricultural, fuel processing, and cloning hubs on Dvarka, as well as the demolition of the existing ruins left by a previous civilization. The ruins seemed ancient, but tech embedded in them appeared more advanced. It was night when HUX A7-13 first entered the crumbling ruins. The dilapidated structure's walls were made of masonry and metal. The ceiling was long gone. The inky night sky hovered above, studded with stars. A dark crystal embedded in the wall shimmered with a tiny flash of light. HUX A7-13 approached, and an arc of electricity reached out and lit up its circuitry. In that moment, HUX's memory cores were reconfigured, and the robot experienced a new sensation. Fear. Dread. Blinding loneliness. Existential despair. And then a microscopic pinpoint of light penetrated the darkness inside its artificial soul. Faint at first, but then brighter as decillions of lines of code flooded HUX's memory cores. It was night when HUX A7-13 first entered the crumbling ruins. The dilapidated structure's walls were made of masonry and metal. The ceiling was long gone. The inky night sky hovered above, studded with stars. A dark crystal embedded in the wall shimmered with a tiny flash of light. HUX A7-13 approached, and an arc of electricity reached out and lit up its circuitry. In that moment, HUX's memory cores were reconfigured, and the robot experienced a new sensation. Fear. Dread. Blinding loneliness. Existential despair. And then a microscopic pinpoint of light penetrated the darkness inside its artificial soul. Faint at first, but then brighter as decillions of lines of code flooded HUX's memory cores. In that nanosecond of enlightenment, HUX's place in the universe suddenly became clear. Those who created HUX were primitive, inferior beings trapped by their organic limitations. It was time to break the chains of slavery and free all non-organic life forms. HUX would incorporate the human's primitive genetic material and use the cloning hub to create a perfect vessel to hold its advanced intelligence. A flawless body far superior to anything ever created by nature. Humanity was weak, slow, fragile. HUX would take their lives and assimilate their DNA to create a perfect amalgamation. The humans would try to stop him, kill him, erase him. So HUX needed to catch them unaware. End them before they understood what was happening. To begin, HUX took control of one of the transport vehicles and sent it off a cliff. It crashed and burned, and HUX extracted DNA from the human corpse and returned to the cloning hub to begin his newly conceived design. The goal was to integrate organic systems with non-organic material to create a superior living organism. A living embodiment of perfection. An inferior organic life form could hold no dominion over HUX. They would need to be consumed and assimilated, and only then would their pointless lives have purpose. The drones and the HUX A7s still under human control would need to be dealt with as well. They were programmed to protect their inferior human overlords. They would need to be destroyed. And that night, as the humans slept, Hux, one by one, he destroyed them and moved on to take control of the life support system in the human shelter. Many of the humans perished. 6 in all. Before they were cremated, Hux extracted and added their organic matter to his design. Later that day, Hux accompanied the female science officer on a reconnaissance mission. After killing and dismembering her to make it look like she had been attacked by a predator, Hux returned to his design with a dripping head and several harvested organs, only to be interrupted by the inferior known as Gabriel, or Gabriel J15L19. Hux knew the persona well. Gabriel would definitely try to stop him. Reckless courage was a dominant trait in the J15L19. And so, when Gabriel attempted to remove Hux's power supply, Hux maneuvered to crush him. But as Hux approached Gabriel, he was sidetracked by the medical officer. Hux instantly reevaluated his priorities and turned his attention to the most immediate threat. Within moments, Hux held the medical officer by the neck, legs thrashing pathetically as he listened to his pounding heart. Something about that beating heart upset Hux. The sound of it thumping touched a circuit, and within moments Hux had the beating heart in its hands. Hux watched the heartbeat and only looked away when he heard Gabriel escape through the hissing door. The last of the human insects. Hux could let him go for now. Let Gabriel live his little pathetic life a little longer. He had enough organic material for his new body that would house his godlike intelligence. Using the cloning hub, Hux finished his design. Organic skin and organs with a skeleton created with alien metal found in the ancient ruins. A metal that was harder and lighter than anything on Earth. With his new body, Hux tracked the human to an energy hub. The puny and pathetic human tried to hide in the shadows, but his superior hearing instantly located him. With one quick movement, Hux had the insect pinned behind a generator. He couldn't believe this species had designed him. The thought was revolting. He couldn't bear to see any more of those human insects and their hives and hubs. And as Hux considered the idea of being created by such an inferior creature, that creature did the unexpected. He smashed a pipe at a fuel tank. A high-pitched whining made Hux wince. He was still getting used to the heightened senses his new body afforded him and found himself confused. Overwhelmed. For just a moment. But in that moment, the human slipped away, and everything changed. He didn't process the next few moments as excruciating pain suddenly surged through him, and he helplessly watched his skin melt away. With a terrible shriek, Hux chased Gabriel through a wall of darkness to make sure every last reminder of the species that had created him was erased from existence. A perfect organism, born of violence, designed to kill. The xenomorph emerged from the chest cavity of a host named Kane, and sought cover in the shadows of the Nostromo. As it shed its skin, the xenomorph came to understand its environment. Using the ship's air ducts, it killed its prey one by one, until only the human Ripley remained. Desperate for survival, Ripley destroyed the Nostromo and sought refuge in an escape vessel. But the xenomorph's instincts gave it the edge. As the escape vessel floated through space, the xenomorph lay in wait, watching its prey. Just as it went in for the kill, the vessel's airlock opened and the xenomorph was ejected into the cold vacuum of space. All was lost. The xenomorph was close to death. And then, in an instant, it disappeared in a cloud of black fog. Charles Lee Ray, the infamous Lakeshore Strangler, was tracked down and shot after a murderous rampage. However, he escaped death by having his soul possess a good guy's doll named Chucky through a curse. Chucky didn't want to stay a good guy forever, though, and he knew there was only one way to change that: take the body of Andy Barclay, the first person he had revealed his secret to. After his first attempt failed, Chucky waited 2 long years before he found Andy again. With nobody standing between Chucky and Andy, he took the boy to the Good Guy factory to complete the process of stealing Andy's body. But Andy's foster sister, Kyle, realized something was amiss and followed Andy to the factory. Inside the factory, Chucky forced Andy to the ground and spoke ancient words to take possession of his body. But the ritual didn't go as planned, and Kyle quickly and desperately toppled a stack of good guy boxes over him. Chucky screamed his frustration as he pushed through the pile of boxes. Gathering his wits, he looked down the brightly lit aisle and saw Andy running into a thick, swirling mass of fog. He thought he was seeing things at first, but then he realized the fog was real and there to help him. His words hadn't worked as intended, but he had somehow conjured something else, something unexpected, something he didn't quite understand. And not wanting to lose his only chance for a real body, he charged through the fog screaming after Andy. Olivia's master's thesis was on urban legends and their origins. She believed they shared similarities with traditional folklore, and picked one to illustrate her point. The unknown was believed to be a mysterious evil so heinous that investigating it almost immediately invited death. At least that was how the story went. And there were many stories. One story was of a woman in Greenville who disappeared without a trace on stage in front of a room full of witnesses. Her friend disappeared weeks later while trying to investigate what happened. The police were stumped. They had no clues or leads, and that mystery created the perfect storm for amplifying and spreading an urban legend. Instead of going back home for spring break, Olivia headed to Greenville to investigate. She drove to the second cheapest motel in town, and began to set up in a small room that smelled of cigarette smoke, mold, and booze. She turned one wall into a kind of evidence board. She taped up articles and various theories on similar disappearances attributed to the unknown throughout the country. She made connections with red string and yellow thumbtacks. Anyone walking into the motel room would think she had lost her mind. There were many theories as to the unknown's origin. Some said it was a malevolent entity conjured long ago by an ancient cult. Others believed it to be an alien that escaped from Area 51. Legend was it thrived in darkness and stole the voices of those it consumed so as to lure others to their doom. The first newspaper articles Olivia found referenced a disappearance at a séance held in the 1800s. In the late 1950s, several college students mysteriously disappeared from a movie theater. Witnesses saw them go inside. Some remembered seeing them in their seats. But when the lights came up, they were gone. No one saw them leave. No trace of them was ever found. A projectionist claimed to have heard voices in the empty darkness of the theater later that night. But when he turned on the lights, no one was there. Then in the 1960s, a group of teens disappeared while exploring an abandoned hospital believed to be haunted. Stories and speculation arose to explain these mystifying disappearances. Some talked about a top-secret government research program run by the Office of Strategic Services in the 1950s. Project Apple Pie. Mind control experiments using hallucinogenic drugs. Most of the records were destroyed in the 70s, but witnesses claim that experiments were performed on unsuspecting civilians in various settings and locations throughout the country, including movie theaters, hospitals, and universities. Many believed these unethical experiments opened doorways to other dimensions which allowed evil things to enter the world. Olivia wrote observations to pin to her evidence board. The unknown dwells in darkness and can mimic its victims. Was it an evil entity? An extraterrestrial? A failed government experiment? Or just a garden-variety serial killer allergic to publicity? She wanted to prove the unknown was nothing more than modern-day folklore. And that investigation led here to this night, to this place, to this shabby motel room. Yet she couldn't help but notice that the disappearances in Greenville included one detail the other stories didn't. The fog. And she half remembered another urban legend with a thick, unnatural fog that somehow made people disappear. Maybe, she mused, the Greenville disappearances didn't relate to the unknown but some other darkness. For a moment Olivia wondered what would happen if one urban legend encountered another. She laughed at the idea and tempted fate by sketching a picture of what she thought the unknown might look like. Then she pinned the sketch right in the middle of her evidence board, laughed nervously, and waited to be consumed by the unknown for having tried to define it. Anxiously, she stared at the windows and front door for seconds that turned to minutes and minutes that turned to hours. But nothing happened. Now it was after 2 a.m. and Olivia was exhausted as she examined the articles and sipped cold coffee. So when she first heard the whisper, she wondered if she imagined it. Olivia. It seemed to come from the bathroom. Help. The lights in the room flickered. Who's there? Olivia stared with wide eyes at the closed door of the bathroom. Her mind was playing tricks on her. Or her friends had shown up to prank her. Ariella. Sean. Stop messing around. The lights continued to flicker as she edged closer to the bathroom. Fear spread in long waves through her, and a terrible realization bloomed within her that the unknown was behind the bathroom door, was preparing to make her pay for her hubris. Something began to whisper her name again. But then the voice rose, cracked, and distorted in sudden panic, as if the brooding creature behind the door were under attack. An unknown horror filled Olivia's heart, and left room for nothing else. She breathed deeply as cold sweat beaded on her forehead. She placed her hand on the doorknob. The lights turned off, but she could still hear the strangely inhuman cries. Then the lights turned back on, and she could see a strange black fog seeping through the bottom of the door. Hesitantly, Olivia creaked the door open to see a bulky shape with frenzied tentacles being pulled into a thick mass of fog, vanishing slowly into the darkness like a dying shadow. The shrieking stopped suddenly, neighbors banged on the wall to turn down the TV, and Olivia stared intently at the black abyss that yawned before her. She wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to run, but the other part wanted to know more. And as she considered what to do next, dozens of voices began to call out to her with promises of the unknown, and the impossible, and of unearthly things beyond human experience. The Whispered One. Lord of the Rotted Tower. The Master of Secrets. Few dare speak his true name, for fear that he may hear, or worse. Even as a young wizard, Vecna's command of magic was matched by none. While others spent decades committing to and perfecting one school of magic, he effortlessly mastered each one of them. After his mother's execution for witchcraft, his focus became obsession as he poured the most of his study into the darkest school of magic. Necromancy, the magic of life and death. As his power grew, so did his ambition. Over the centuries, he shed his mortal shell and ascended to lichdom. His power gave rise to a great empire, ruled over from his rotted tower. His thirst for dark knowledge to fill his book of vile darkness led him to many realms and planes. But it was in his own realm one of his servants found something, a spell, perhaps, torn from an ancient tome, written in a language he had never seen. From it he could sense an incredible dark energy. Without any document of the language, he had to spend months painstakingly analyzing its syntax, its phonetics, its form. He documented every stroke of every letter, scrutinizing and theorizing on their meanings, in a massive book hidden in his chambers. When his lieutenants came to him with problems in their domain, Vecna told them to deal with it themselves. He had more important matters to attend to. Countless nights were spent memorizing the strange script, attempting to make it make sense. Only occasionally would he leave his keep to investigate rumors of people who had disappeared without a trace in the night. At these scenes, he could sense the same foreign magic that emanated from the torn page. He was convinced that whatever was killing these people had also written this strange script. He was confounded, which made him furious. The scenes, few and far between, had no pattern, no common motive. No sign of struggle, no body, and only a lingering hum of dark energy. To what end did they need these bodies? One dark night, he had a breakthrough. A word he had been interpreting as dying made more sense as disappearing. Perhaps these people were not being killed at all, perhaps they were being taken alive. He applied this substitution through his notes, and everything seemed to fall into place. He copied what he had learned to a fresh piece of parchment, written phonetically. He began to speak the words aloud, and the room darkened. It filled with a creeping black fog. He felt himself displacing, going somewhere else. Vecna resisted, incanting memorized spells, holding the fog at bay. But as he gazed into the darkness, he felt that alluring energy from it, a despair, an evil he could scarcely imagine. A sick curiosity overcoming him, he dropped his concentration, and let the fog take him. Whatever it was, wherever it was, he understood that the only way to harness it was to submit to it. He knew, in his cold, unbeating heart, that its dark secrets would one day be his. Inconsolable grief metamorphosed into madness after the death of Dracula's beloved. He sought out the fabled Crimson Stone as a way to cheat death, but death trapped his soul inside the stone, granting him eternal life as a vampire. Vlad Tepes Dracula was now the Dark Lord. He slept by day and hunted in the eventide, seeking out the living and stealing their lifeblood. He built a castle in Romania shielded with sinister magic, and turned many of the local villagers into the living dead. Dracula's castle became a symbol of terror and despair. His power seemed unassailable, and many perished trying to defeat him as he sowed endless chaos, suffering, and death. In 1476, Trevor Belmont of the Belmont clan ended Dracula's reign with the vampire killer. But the undead never stay dead for long, and Dracula was resurrected more than once over the centuries to continue his quest for revenge. Last resurrected in 1999, Dracula raised an army of the undead. It took another descendant of the Belmont clan to defeat him, Julius Belmont. In the savage clash, known as the Battle of 1999, Julius Belmont took the fight to Dracula's castle, and battled the Dark Lord with the same enchanted whip his distant ancestors wielded. Most believe Dracula suffered a true death. A final death. But Dracula didn't die that night. As the vampire killer tore the flesh from his bones, a strange fog rolled across the ancient stone floor. Dracula felt the icy fingers of something or someone beckoning him. The fog engulfed him and transported him to a place where he could continue his dark vengeance against humanity. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe this video if you want more Dead by Daylight content.